Today we'll talk about the future of our country. And strange as it may seem, despite the fact that we are still under occupation, I mean the occupation by the world community, it's Russia. Rus in the wide sense has the opportunity to stop the Ottoman conquest. It's we who will soon have to fight such a majestic enemy as the union of Ukraine, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan and other peoples. But the most important thing is how the world community and most importantly our country will react to what is happening and what changes will take place. Earlier, in the project of The Matrix Reloaded, we showed you that for now everything is going according to plan. I mean, world disasters force people to move to other territories, and this happens every 100 years. Why every 100 years, and why every 20 years there are new attempts at a world coup? We told about in the project The World is on the Verge of Caliphate. Today, I'm gonna talk to you about whether a political, economic and geopolitical split is possible in our country, and most importantly, in the whole world. And it's awful that there are already preconditions for that. After all, in the book of the Revelation of Saint John the Divine, a clear plan is given, and there is no single priest of the cult of the god Marduk has gone off this plan yet. So what awaits Russia? Let's talk about it. Alright, we know that now our country is ruled by Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. You might say, why remind us? After all, he is the eternal king on the eternal throne of the Russian Federation. However, it's not for long. As it turned out, before the arrival of that very Antichrist or god Marduk, it's very important to change the political and territorial structure of the entire planet. As we said earlier, all those territories that are located north of the mountains that we called Elbrus and below, according to the invaders of the planet, will be the Ottoman Empire, including the very Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan and other states, highly likely including Mongolia. But the most important thing is that in 2026, the entire policy of the whole world establishment must completely change. It's not only about the fact that there were 7 priests of the cult of the so-called god Marduk. We are talking about Canada, France, Germany, Japan, England and Italy in order to start new processes. However, another thing is important, that actually all these 7 priests are subordinate to just 2 states that would seem to be aside from everything that happens. The first state is Israel. These are the Sephardim, I mean the bankers who in fact rule the world, and of course the very Ottoman Empire that is military part of the state. In The Matrix Reloaded, we showed that several chapters from the Revelation of Saint John the Divine presage the unification of world religions, and this process has already started. For this, it's necessary to discredit other religions. That is also actively happening in Italy. I mean that very Roman Catholic Church. And then we'll see the merger of 2 religions. This is Islam and most importantly Judaism. Moreover, according to the revelation of Saint John the Divine, by the end of time even these 2 religions will merge into one, and not a religion but the cult of the god Marduk or the god Dionysius and so on. We told all this in our project of The Matrix Reloaded. It's important to note another thing, that now it's necessary not just to change the world economy or, as we predicted previously, that the vaccine against the terrible virus will come from Germany. It's just logical, because if the Germans rule science, then they must work a miracle in the form of a vaccine that will suddenly heal everyone. and the UK will completely change the economy of the planet. But when will that happen? Since October the 10th, 2020, the process has been launched and it will start to be implemented actively and massively from December the 10th, 2020. In addition, this date is the most important holiday in Judaism. We are talking about the sacred New Year's Day. We celebrate the New Year's Day on the night of December the 31st to January the 1st, but as for them, this year, they celebrate it on the night of December the 10th to December the 11th, 2020. That's why events are now moving very slowly but surely towards the certain trends. Starting from December the 10th, it will be almost impossible to change the world establishment. Another important thing is that December the 10th is one of the unique holidays. Actually, we are talking about a holiday that we call human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted exactly on December the 10th at the UN. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a document recommended for all United Nations member states that was adopted at the third session of the UN General Assembly on December the 10th, 1948. The text of the declaration is the first global definition of the rights that all people have. However, the actions of the most countries associated with suppressing the spread of the epidemic in 2020 largely violate the once adopted declaration. Many people seriously think that measures taken violate their rights, and highly likely that on December the 10th, 2020, the declaration will be amended so that there are no contradictions with the local legislation of the member states. Also, let's pay attention to the prophecies that we decoded in the project of The Matrix Reloaded. Since September the 23rd, 2017, the revelation of Saint John the Divine has acquired specific dates for further events. Remind you, at that time, the birth of the future Satan, the Prince of Darkness, was precisely reproduced in the starry sky. Jupiter has been in the womb of Virgo for 9 months, and a crown of 12 stars was above its head. Such an astronomical event takes place once every several thousand years. Let's take a look at the starry sky on December the 10th, 2020. At first sight, everything seems natural, excepting the fact that it's hardly ever for the planets to line up in one row. So Saturn, Jupiter, the Sun, Mercury, Venus and the Moon will draw a straight line going from the constellation of Aquarius and Capricorn to the constellation of Leo, crossing Sagittarius, Ophiuchus, Scorpio, Libra and Virgo. Note that since December the 21st, 2012, humanity has entered the age of Aquarius, as the ancient Maya wrote and warned about. In ancient myths, the constellation of Capricorn always meant Baphomet himself or Satan, because he is always depicted as a god, and not only in painting, but also on tarot cards. The constellation of Leo symbolizes power, and it means that the struggle to establish a new world order has already started. We would draw your attention to those constellations that cross the trajectory of the planetary movement. We are talking about the constellation of Eagle, symbolizing the Roman Empire, and now the Ottoman Empire. The eagle through the shield along the Milky Way runs into the constellations of Nomar and the Southern Triangle, symbolizing the Freemasons order. The next line goes from the constellation of the Northern Crown, symbolizing the power of the Northern civilization, to the Centaur, personifying the Southern civilization. The resulting symbol in religion means the Christian cross. If we continue the lines, then we get the connection of two lines and another sign, that is the symbol of the Baphomet or the devil that appears in the starry sky on December the 10th, 2020. In secret societies, they use its designation in the form of crossed fingers. By the way, this symbol is called the sign of the god and means the constellation of Capricorn. And what's interesting, once on December the 10th this declaration was adopted, and on December the 10th, 2020 it will be eliminated. And it's from this day the occupation or digitalization of Earth will start. Or in other words, that very third horseman of the apocalypse. If someone still didn't understand, the war has started on April the 6th, 2020. But the most important thing is that the third horseman is directly that digitalization. We talked about this in our project of The Matrix Reloaded. I recommend you to rewatch it. Well, now one more interesting point. In order to destroy the modern political system and then transfer control to France, as we remember from the movie The Matrix Reloaded, France will rule the world in the next era. So, in order to transfer, it's necessary to remove the most important leaders from the world arena. And from December the 10th, this process will start for various reasons. Someone will be overthrown, someone will be killed or will be poisoned as usual. Someone will be asked to resign, someone himself suddenly will leave his post. That's highly likely to happen with the Russian president. And even if President of Russia next year doesn't leave his post on a certain date, which I will tell you soon, that highly likely he will delegate all the powers to another person. But now the most important thing is to which person. Before starting a war, if we are talking about great wars, there was always a time to gather commonwealths. Now, until December the 10th, 2020, all countries must unite, either in one bloc or another. That's why now there will be a lot of various international meetings and agreements. Moreover, it's not easy to unite and most importantly to understand who will rule during a future war. And as we understand, the governance of just one president or monarch is not effective in case of war, since the front is very long. Therefore, always on the eve of wars, there was an integration or occurrence of so-called state councils, some large national parties and other things. That's why, in the near future, Vladimir Vladimirovich simply must start forming that very state council, and it's the state council that will govern Russia in the future and not Vladimir Vladimirovich. And it won't matter if he remains on duty or not. Oddly enough, the only significant obstacle to start the future Third World War is the president of Belarus, Lukashenko. I know you criticize me a lot, saying that I absolutely don't understand anything about the atrocities that are taking place now in Minsk. I have also repeatedly replied to these comments on my social networks. I do understand that now you are in a difficult situation, but you must also understand that provocations leading to violence do not come from Lukashenko or even from you, from the people, but from those people who come to peaceful protests with weapons and provoke the authorities to use weapons as well. No world should start with violence, so if it seems to you that this is not your president, choose other means of protection. The most important thing is different. Even if you don't like Lukashenko, however, nationally at the moment, he is really the only president of, let's say, our origin. unlike all other presidents. Yes, he was really ordered to leave his post in the summer. I mean, not even being able to run for president, and he told everyone, "Yeah, I understand you, I will not." But nevertheless, he ran for, and although it may seem strange to you, but he really wants to protect the last stronghold of Russian lands. Therefore, unfortunately, according to our forecasts, the Belarusian president has a very unenviable future. There is a very high risk that he will be poisoned and overthrown for this very reason. Well, now let's go back to, as they say, our lands, namely to Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. You know that we are not just predictors of a logical or historical origin. We are primarily numerologists, and we came across a lot of things, even as a part of the revision of history, precisely because of our vision of numbers. Let's look at the chart of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and for our students I will use the generic karma program. But don't rush to fill in the data, because not all of our techniques are included in this program. First of all, we don't consider him as a person here. However, for us, he is the president, so you should type not Putin Vladimir Vladimirovich, but as he is called in the world community, Vladimir Putin. His middle name is not called. And below, in the bottom line, please fill in Russian space Federation. The date of foundation doesn't matter here. We are more interested in the date when he directly assumed the post. The first post of President of the Russian Federation, and then we get that you see now on your screens. So let's take a look at the chart of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin as President of the Russian Federation. In the first house that is responsible for personality, there is a positive 13 arcane. We remember that when he came to power, first of all he started to carry out numerous reforms. He significantly changed not only the territorial integrity of the country, and even got into the concepts of some federal subjects of Russia, but also changed the legislation and, for example, how the Federation Council is formed. There were really lots of reforms. Please note that he has the first term in a positive aspect. The next is the second house and the second arcane. I remind you, there is a deuce here. It's a high priest, but is not responsible for mother or woman. First of all, Deuce is responsible for money, because the planet is the moon, and it got into its house. It's the owner of its house. The second house is also the house of Taurus, and we see that the country's economy at the second stage of Putin's reform indeed has started to rise up, and at the end of 2008, he really carried weight on the world arena. Some factories were revived, others of course ceased to exist. But that was not his problem, it was Yeltsin's problem. He activated the collapse of the economy exactly in terms of the industry. However, at that point, Putin started to engage in international trade and developed very successfully in this matter. At the end of 2008, there was a generally global financial crisis, and although it affected our country, but not as globally as other states. Further, as we remember, according to the constitution of the Russian Federation, he could not hold the post for the third time. Therefore, in the third term, he was replaced by his friend and party fellow Medvedev, but we won't consider this. Move on, the third and the fourth terms of our president. As you can see, the third term falls in the positive aspects. The most important thing is that it's the 21st arcane. Let me remind you that during the third term, Vladimir Vladimirovich made a very good progress towards gaining a sufficiently high authority of the world community. Moreover, many countries even said that he could be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. It was 2014 and even Germans, French and Italians came out to their squares and said that they very respect and recognize President Putin, and this actively showed in mass media. He even was featured on the covers of major tabloid newspapers in Europe and the US. So we see that it was probably the most powerful period in the reign of Vladimir Vladimir Vladimirovich precisely in the light of the recognition by the world community. Okay, the fourth term is right now. We see that it's a positive sign, and it says that he will certainly be elected. And we see this, he's really elected. But here is already the 11th arcane, and the 4th house is responsible for a bloodline, a homeland, and a nation. So the 11th arcane reminds that this is a sign of revolution, a sign of war, confrontations. We see all this in the chart. And indeed, now a revolutionary sentiment is coming, and the whole nation is turning against the president. Remember, earlier I gave a forecast in 2018 and said that there would be an uprising against the president and he would be overthrown, or more specifically, he would be asked to leave. Putin will leave his post himself, but that time we really made a slight mistake, and I apologize to you, our audience, for that, all because we didn't take into account the fact that he managed to amend the constitution of the Russian Federation. In particular, we didn't take into account these 2 years during the term of reign, and therefore the whole forecast that we published for 2018 is automatically shifted to 2020, and if you watch it now, you'll see that everything we said then is coming true now. But this is not the point. The point is that by the 4th reign, you see he's already coming with the 11th arcane, that certainly speaks of the beginning of revolutionary sentiments. Let's take another look at the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th terms of reign. I draw your attention to the fact that opposite the 13th sign is the 7th house, and there is a negative value here. The 7th house is the house of health, and we remember that in this period of time there are rumors about the probable death of our president. I can neither confirm nor deny. However, according to numerology, it's highly likely that he was either poisoned or there were attempts to assassinate him. Because the house of health is negative, the 22nd arcane means numerous repeated attempts, and the 13th arcane itself speaks of probable death. However, since the 13th arcane is positive, he could survive these events, but the fact that it was very dangerous for his health is evident from the signs themselves. The next sign and the 2nd term, the 2nd arcane. The 8th house stands opposite. The 8th house is a house of karma, a house of money, a house of property, and again there is a negative 22nd arcane in it. Therefore, despite the fact that the Russian president has boosted the economy of our country, there was a global collapse in the world community. We remember how significant the crisis was, and all the countries were emerging from that since 2008 to 2010. The 3rd term of reign, as you can see, opposite is the 9th house, and the 9th house is responsible for the international community, and there is 1 here, and 1 is a sign of a magicon, recognition, and therefore in this period of time, indeed he didn't pay so much attention to Russian citizens, but has won universal recognition abroad. Well, now let's look at the 4th house or the 4th presidential term. There is the 10th house opposite. The 10th house in this system is responsible for the career, and there is a negative 19th arcane here. This is the fall of the president's power, and here fortunately the 11th arcane is still positive. I mean the revolutions, which in the near future in November will flare up throughout the country. But I remind you our forecast, the dangerous one will be a revolution that starts in Yekaterinburg. So these signs indicate that the revolution will not overthrow our president. And don't waste your time, don't risk your health and your freedom, I mean probable imprisonment. This will not save the situation. Moreover, it will not play any role excepting the one that was on the eve of the First World War, when there was a revolution in Russia. Our power has weakened so much, and the people themselves have weakened so much that unfortunately, within the First World War, we didn't achieve the victories and complete the challenges we needed. So the power of the president will be personally given in favor of the state councils, or perhaps to some person, yet we tend to believe that it will be some kind of state council. This can be seen from our data. He could reign further. Remember, it was not by chance that he has amended the constitution. Note where in the constitution the changes took place. By the way, in the near future, attempts to amend the constitution in Belarus will be made as well. So, according to the new constitution of the Russian Federation, the terms of president are no longer limited and he can run for the next term. And relatively speaking, by the next term he can nominate himself. However, we see by the signs that the president will not have a fifth term. There is a negative sign here. Moreover, this sign falls into the fifth house, and the fifth house is responsible for hobbies, and we see that the fifth house is also responsible for forming alliances and unions. This is the house of successors, and we understand that the president will transfer his power to a certain successor. And now I wonder what kind of successor. Look into the opposite house. In the 11th house there is a sixth arcane, that is family member, but since I don't think that this is directly about family or blood ties, yet there are rumors that Putin's son-in-law may take his post. However, I think that this is a family in the sense of a secret society. Therefore, the head of that very state machine will be a person who is directly related to some secret organization. Therefore, as we can see, there will definitely not be a fifth presidential term. If we are talking about how right or wrong he is building his policies, let's look at the sixth house. The 18th arcane is responsible not only for the family, marriage, internal politics, but first of all, it's the house of nepotism, household, and the house of daily life. And the arcane itself is very positive. It stands in a positive aspect, and it suggests that the president's policy is rather soft. He doesn't plan to destroy the country, but unfortunately, he is in the framework of certain conditions. What kind of conditions? Opposite is the 12th house, and in the 12th house there is a negative 20th arcane. This is the arcane of Rus, the arcane of the family. That means that the ideas, the directions of the government, not only the president but also those people who stand behind him, are aimed at destroying the concept of homeland and Rus, which is not favorable. If we look at the successors of our president, then as you remember the first one was Medvedev. This is the 11th arcane, the house of Mars. It stands in the 9th house with a positive arcane. But my students know that if we go down and see if this successor has a future, then there are already two negative arcanes. It means that Medvedev will never return to the presidency. Let's see the next successor. There is one here, the house of Neptune, the 7th house. In the 7th house, as you can see, there is a negative arcane, so the successor will take office replacing the current president, and it means that he doesn't serve until the end of his term. However, this successor definitely has a future, but there is no future for his successors. Therefore, highly likely, there will be some kind of world order in which there will be no election of the president or, for example, officials of the state council. That's why I said that on December the 10th, 2020, the whole world will mourn the fact that finally such definitions as the government of the people or freedoms of the people will be abolished in favor of these secret societies, because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights will be eliminated on December the 10th, 2020. Well, let's now look at the karma of our president. And here we also split it into several terms. So the first term, the 22nd arcane, is in a negative value. Why? Because even though our president was the only person supposed to be a president, However, he was elected from a large number of people. His challenge at that time, as we remember, was the reform that he successfully carried out. This is the 13th arcane. I remind you, this is a completely different calculation, but the arcane turned out the same. In his second term, his challenge was to force other contenders from the presidency out, so the race was very dangerous for those who entered it. As a result, he won this race, and his challenge was to shift to another world community, and as we remember, he revived the world economy. The third term. He was already opposed by common people who were not politicians. However, he won, and his challenge was to reform and to root the system of presidential power directly on the territory of Russia. The current fourth term, the 19th arcane, and here he will have to fight for power, as we said earlier, and as you can see, the 16th arcane is positive. What's the challenge? I remind you, the challenge of the 16th arcane is to destroy the old world and build a new one, and he did it. That's why he completely eliminated the constitution of the Russian Federation, which had been in force since 1993. Most importantly, he totally changes the composition of the ruling establishment, I mean the legislative branch. He even changes the form of how the Attorney General, prosecutors, judges and others will be appointed. He fundamentally changes everything. He destroys the old and creates the new. Moreover, his challenge also includes the destruction of our economy and the introduction of a completely different currency. And all this will start on December 10th, 2020. And will continue until a certain date. I'll tell you a little later. And this is already interesting. Look at the fifth term. As you can see, the 15th arcane is negative, and this is impossible. This is the arcane of the devil, and there will be a person at the post who will subsequently extend his hand to the future Marduk. And there are no challenges to Putin. The value of the number has been crossed out. The sixth term is similar, the fall of power, even death, if he goes to the sixth term, but of course, due to age, this is no longer possible. Nevertheless, just for example, if he runs for, he would be killed in the presidential race. Now let's look at the graph of presidential influence since the beginning of his reign. And here, since this graph can be said to be legal, we are counting not from the date of May the 7th, the year 2000, but from January the 1st. Those who have been trained with us in business numerology know that all kinds of legal entities always calculated from January the 1st. So we see that when he took office by May 2020, his position was already above the middle line, so he was greeted with a bang. Accordingly, in 2004, there was a drop at the moment when there was a re-election. There were rumors that he might not be re-elected, but even the graph shows that he is re-elected and is going up. By 2012, when power was partly transferred, you remember at that moment Medvedev reigned here, and here on the graph the same thing, his power is at 0. Of course, there were some rumors that he still ruled, but as you can see, he did not. Further, we see that since 2011 Putin's power is almost absent. Relatively speaking, in the first two terms, despite the fact that he was not strongly supported by the people, his power was very strong. And since 2011, exactly when people started talking about digitalization and when Medvedev adopted a decree on the future digitalization of Russia, and that very chipization that is going to be started in 2020 as indicated in this decree. We see the falling of president's power, and by 2022 it will almost disappear. Now it's worth paying attention to the period when he may finally lose power. We need 2021 and 2022. Note that there is a decline here. Here is the point of 2021. Further, in 2022, the decline in the graph. And if you look further, the graph almost never rises above the middle line, well besides the age and so on. We are interested in this point. To make it more clearly, we have made this graph larger. Here we go, please. 2021, January. we get a value of 6 here. By 2022, the value is 1. By connecting the point, we draw the middle line. The same intersection is formed. So this intersection is April the 7th, 2021. And this suggests that, relatively speaking, from today, it's now November 2020. So from November to April the 7th, 2021, the president can still retain some power. Yet, from April the 7th, 2021, he will either leave the post completely or delegate his authority to some state council. That's why in the video of 2018 we talked about the fact that the president may not be re-elected in April. At that time there were rumors about the election, and it would seem on May the 7th he had to either take office or not, therefore explaining the reasons why we made a mistake. We didn't make an amendment of 2 years. Now it's obvious that the president may not reach the presidential race in the future. Accordingly, April the 7th is an amazing day. After all, if you remember, when the president took office, the first, the initial, the right one, and the president we needed, who highly likely was the real Putin, he took office and was greeted with a bang. However, after a while, Kursk submarine disaster occurred, and many historians, scientists, and even those who are engaged in secret societies and world conspiracies argue that highly likely in this period he died and his post was taken by another person, the so-called Separ. So what's interesting here, that in world history there have been cases when presidents or kings being replaced. As on March the 5th, 1553, Ivan the Terrible was replaced, or how once Peter the Great was replaced. Therefore, it's quite possible that the bloggers' versions in this sense can be completely fair. Moreover, honestly, I also adhere to this opinion. I remind you that in the first house the president has a negative 22nd arcane, and accordingly the 13th arcane is positive. So the chance of assassination and death existed anyway, so April the 7th, 2021 can be said to be a holiday. It's Memorial Day for the dead submariners. It turns out that the reign of President Putin, which started with Kursk submarine disaster, will end on April the 7th, 2021, on Memorial Day for the dead submariners, and it will be the end of the cycle. Well, let's hope that he will be alive and kicking, and perhaps even remain in power, but the state council will rule. If we are talking about what's gonna happen in Russia, then the state council gonna shift to a partial martial law, because remind you, a great war between Rus and the Ottomans may start from July 24 to 27, 2021, and we really hope by that time the agreements won't have been signed, and perhaps we will be able, as in 1920, to avoid a war with the Ottoman Empire. But actually, wars on this territory are possible, since the nation and the spirit of the nation have already been trampled on, and many peoples want to leave the European Union, so Russia can also suffer very seriously. Well, if we talk about the March presidential elections in the United States of America, now everyone is discussing who will be president, Biden or the current president Trump. I can say the following: it doesn't matter who wins. Why? Because in the United States of America, the inevitable process of disintegration will start in March 2021. Perhaps we'll get 50 states in the future, perhaps it will be several states. However, the United States of America, unfortunately, is already prepared for destruction. I mean as a political entity, and we are not only talking about disasters, but in general, this world must be cleaned up. Therefore, regarding to North and South America as the continents, it's desirable to consider moving to the mainland of Eurasia, Africa, and of course the more northern lands that are being opened now. Let me draw your attention to the fact that scientists have already started talking seriously about natural anomalies taking place this year. After all, the Arctic Ocean doesn't freeze after summer and before winter comes. Moreover, the melting of glaciers doesn't stop, mountain tops are melting too. It's not only about Elbrus, but also about other mountains. The volcano in Germany starts to wake up, the volcano in Iceland starts to wake up, and highly likely the volcano in Hong Kong will wake up too. And in general, volcanic activity in December 2020 will already be very obvious. Earthquakes will only increase if we are talking about serious warming in central Russia and in the northern territories of Russia, the North Arctic Ocean. And as for North and South America, everything will be exactly the opposite. North America will freeze up and Europe will freeze up strongly. And there is some warming in Moscow now, which we also predicted earlier, but over time, there will be a cooling to the level of modern Great Britain. So we see that the climate is changing. This is an unavoidable process. We cannot influence what happens outside of our actions, and no HARP or any other stations will affect the climate changes. Perhaps they want to rectify the situation, but in no case should they bring such dangers to our lands. Anyway, we should now think about the fact that in the near future most of presidents, monarchs of various states will leave their posts, and the proteges of the future world government will take their places. As we said earlier, banks will rule the world. Indeed, the world will be ruled by the banking elites, that very Sephardim who were once a part of the Holy Roman Empire and later seized the very greedy rulers of the Ottoman Empire. And despite the fact that the sultans were Ottoman, but the caliphs were the real leaders of the Ottoman Empire. So caliphs both then and now is a completely different nation, and this should always be remembered. So we are now heading towards the disintegration of the political and economic order of the entire Earth planet. This will affect absolutely all states. However, despite this global restructuring, it's still not so scary, and even if some other rulers become the head, so let it be. The people will live in their environment as before. Not much will be changed. While accepting we have to get used to digital control, some strange vaccines, masks and on. However, human rights will be significantly infringed from December the 10th, 2020, and this process will not to be changed. However, as I said earlier, our battle is still ahead. Our challenge is to increase our influence by 2034. To defend Rus from the Ottoman conquest, not to hand over the reins the whole world to the Prince of Darkness in 2026. And let our rulers play in some kind of digital technologies. The main thing is that our salvation, or let's say a person who will really be able to head Rus and lead it to revival, will appear only in 2034. Now it's too early, and the revival of Rus will be the same unavoidable process as the current preconditions to the Third World War. But we have a long way to get there in right way. Well, take care of your rulers. Whether they are still supporters of the old world order. And every new one will bring us not only something new, but unfortunately exactly that's written in the Revelation of Saint John the Divine. The third horseman of the apocalypse will come to us, and in 2026, the fourth one will follow after him. Take care of your families. Pay more attention first of all to the upbringing of your children, because one of them, in the future 2034, will start the revival of Rus. We don't know who it is. It's impossible to find out. However, this is a person already born and living on Earth's planet. Be close to your loved ones. Don't give in to any provocations. Don't carry out the Marduk plan, otherwise we all have to face the Third World War, global epidemics, digitalization and possibly death. Julie Poe was with you. I really hope that this project will change your attitude to what's happening in the world, and no matter how hard it is for us, we all need to come together.